Parrot learned a phrase nobody ever taught him. He used it once, on the only night that it mattered. African gray parrots are not birds in the way most people think about birds. They are, in the quiet language of cognitive research, among the most socially and linguistically complex animals that have ever lived alongside humans. They do not merely repeat what they hear, they categorize, they contextualize. They have been documented in peer-reviewed research, producing novel combinations of learned words in situations that appeared to warrant them. What Ptolemy did on the night of November 18th was documented by a baby monitor, reviewed by 3 professionals across 2 disciplines, and remains, in the words of Dr. Elise Nakamura, the pediatrician who reviewed the case, genuinely difficult to account for in terms that don't require us to rethink what this bird understood. Lena and Bryce Hoffman had owned Ptolemy for 6 years before their son Mateo arrived. The African gray was 22 years old, gray and dust white, with the red tail that marks the Congo subspecies. He had a vocabulary of roughly 480 words and phrases, cataloged partly out of fascination and partly because Lena was a speech-language pathologist and could not help it. He was, in her professional assessment, an animal with a functional understanding of approximately 60 of those words in context. He had never been in Mateo's room. This was the rule from the beginning. An African gray beak can produce 60 pounds per square inch of pressure. Ptolemy had never been aggressive with anyone in 6 years, but a 6-month-old infant is not anyone. The rule was closed door always, and Ptolemy had his space in the living room and seemed uninterested in revising this arrangement. He was interested in Mateo. He tracked the baby's sounds through the walls. He had developed over 6 months a specific attention to the particular cry Mateo produced when something was wrong. Not the hunger cry, not the boredom cry, the one that came from somewhere below those. Lena had noticed Ptolemy's posture change when that cry started. He would stop whatever he was doing and stand very still on his perch, head angled toward the wall, listening. On the night of November 18th, the living room door had not been fully latched, a fact nobody noticed until after. The baby monitor camera showed the nursery door open at 2:47 a.m. Ptolemy walked across the hallway floor. African grays walk when they are moving with purpose, and flew up to the crib rail. He landed on the far end, away from Mateo's head. He sat. The room was dark. Mateo was sleeping. Subscribe right now if you want to know what this parrot said next, because what the monitor recorded at 3:02 a.m. is why this story exists. At 3:02 a.m., Mateo's breathing changed. The monitor recorded what Lena would later describe to Dr. Nakamura as the pre-apnea sound, the slightly irregular, slightly wet quality to the breathing that preceded the worst of his sleep episodes. The sound she had become expert at hearing from the next room. The sound that, on its worst nights, preceded a pause she had to correct by picking him up. At 3:03 a.m., Ptolemy said, "Lena, come." He had never said those 2 words together. He knew both words separately. Lena, her name used in context when she entered the room. Come, used in various phrases he had assembled over 6 years. He had never said, "Lena, pause." Come is a 2-word utterance directed at an empty room in the dark. He said it twice more. Then he changed volume. The 3rd time was not the soft indoor voice of a bird in a lit room. It was the carrying voice of an animal that understood, in some way that has not been fully mapped by any research currently available, that it needed to be heard through a wall. Lena was at the nursery door at 3:04 a.m. Mateo was in the early seconds of an apnea episode. His color was wrong in the way she knew, and could not fully describe to people who had not stood in a dark nursery and seen it. She picked him up. She walked the hallway with him against her chest until his breathing corrected, which took 4 minutes and 12 seconds, which she timed on the clock in the hallway because timing was the one thing her body knew to do when her brain was doing what it did in those moments. Has your pet ever called out in a way that got you to a place you needed to be? Tell us in the comments. Every one of these stories matters. Ptolemy was still on the crib rail when she came back. He looked at her, as African greys look at people with the direct sideways attention of an animal processing information. He said, "Good, just that. Good," a word he used in her catalog in contexts that included task completed, food received, problem resolved. She stood in the nursery holding her son and looked at her parrot on the crib rail and thought about the word come and the word Lena and the way he had put them together. She thought about 6 months of listening through walls. She thought about the posture change she had observed every time the wrong cry started. She thought about an animal that had, in some framework she did not yet have language for, understood that there were 2 categories of sounds from behind that door, and had spent 6 months learning which one required action. Dr. Nakamura, reviewing the monitor footage in the timeline, said, "In 23 years of practice, I have had 3 families tell me their animal raised an alarm before they could. This is the only one with documentation." African gray parrots can hear frequencies humans miss. They detect subtle changes in ambient sound, in breathing patterns, in the quality of silence that follows certain kinds of biological events. Ptolemy had spent 6 months categorizing the sounds of an infant through a wall. He had assembled 2 words from his vocabulary in a novel combination. He had used them in the dark, in an empty hallway directed at a closed door. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones without a medical alert certification, even the ones with feathers. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. Mateo's sleep apnea is now managed with a medical-grade monitor that alerts to both parents' phones. He is 13 months old and has recently discovered the perch near Ptolemy's cage, which he approaches with an expression of concentrated scientific interest. Ptolemy watches him from the perch with the sideways attention of an animal taking in information. He has not said, "Lena, come again." He doesn't need to.